So today I'll be taking us on a very wonderful topic. Yes, the essence of this topic is for us to develop our ears musically so we could recognize what is happening melodically and harmonically um, in the context of what we play on the keys. As we begin to proceed, as we begin to grow, to develop um, in our piano journey, right from learning the major scale till the extent of getting used to all 12 keys and the rest of them, um, we begin to realize that our ears begin to get acquainted to the sound of certain notes, to the sound of all the notes of the major scale at that point in time. The do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, right? And then we begin to realize that during our course of mastering the major scale, we begin to um, we begin to spot out with our ears the position of those notes. We begin to understand which note comes after the other. We begin to understand which note comes before the other, and hence, when we hear a certain note in that major scale, in that established key, we are able to tell whether it's a 3 or a 4 or a 5, whether it's a re, it's a mi, or a so, or whatsoever. So, as to this course, while we begin to proceed, while we grow, we realize that our scope of knowledge goes beyond that. It is now expected of us to begin to go into a more complex part, or I would say a more intermediate part of the ear training and recognition. And as to this course, we begin to encounter the prerequisites for interval recognition. It is to this course that the requirement for interval recognition begins to come into play. And so, what is an interval? First of all, I would like us to know that an interval is a distance between two notes. Yeah, a distance between two notes. Now, that's an interval. Now, I would like us to understand that when we hear an interval, we are not talking about chords, because many people mistake the definition of a chord for an interval. A chord is different from an interval, and an interval is different from a chord. In what way? Now, when we talk about a chord, um, 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 I would like to say centuries ago, it was um, or it was believed that a chord is any combination of two or more notes, right? But as time went on, the theory was being challenged, and hence a chord was now seen and understood as anything that does not have below three notes. For a chord to be called a chord, it must contain what? At least three notes and above. And so a chord is a combination of three or more notes. That's the definition of a chord. So any combination that has not up to three notes is not called a chord. Can never be termed as a chord, but rather an interval. Now this is where the difference between the chord and the interval now comes into play. While a chord must have up to three notes to establish it, to certify it as a chord, to qualify it as a chord, an interval has only two notes and not more than two notes and not below two notes. So we can now therefore say that an interval is a distance between two notes, whereas a chord is a combination of three notes. So the difference between a chord and an interval is what? One note difference. One has what? One more added. So while we are only making use of two notes in the interval, the chord must have three notes before it could be qualified as a chord. And that is why we begin to have triads, and then from triads we begin to go into four-noted chords, to more than four-noted chords, where we begin to go into advanced chords and thereabout. So due to the fact that my scope of view as regards to this teaching will be circled only around the study of intervals, I would only focus around the intervals, whereas next time we could discuss in details about the theory of chords. So, like I said, what's an interval? An interval is a distance between two notes. A distance between two notes. A distance between two notes. It could be closest, it could be what? Farthest. It could be very far. It could be at any distance, but all we are looking at is what? The distance between one note and one note, between two notes. So we can now look at interval as another word for distance in music. So while we are using the word distance in our general English language terminology in various other concepts in other areas, when we are dealing with music, most especially playing the piano, we see interval as a word that replaces the word distance. So interval simply means what? Distance in music. Now, before we go into the knowledge of understanding intervals, I would um, I would like us to understand that um, um, interval is very important for us as musicians. The study of intervals, the knowledge of intervals. Why? Because with the knowledge of intervals, we will be able to do certain things of which ordinary or other kinds of ear training won't do for us. For example, with intervals, we are able to tell the qualities of certain chords. In fact, we could be able to spell out certain chords, as we will see later. Now, with the knowledge of interval, we will be able to um, understand what is happening as regards to the melody. Yes, interval, the knowledge of interval, being trained in understanding intervals with our ears will help us to understand the note that succeeds the other, the note that comes after the other. That's what interval helps us to do. And then interval also finally help us to to um, to improvise, to get creative. So thank you. Thank you for saving me. Thank you, my love. Thank you for saving me. Thank you, my love. So you had something like this. And then at some point you look at. And then at some point in time, I was still playing the same melody, but in different kind of moods. So what am I trying to prove? What sense am I trying to make? We'll realize that with the knowledge of intervals, we could beautify the way we harmonize our melody, we play our melody. Yeah. Now, I would come to that later. I would explain what I'm really doing in details later. But I just wanted you to see the change, the difference in melodic color as regards to the song I just played. Now, let's begin. What is an interval? Like I said, an interval is a distance between two notes. So, if we pick, let's say, the note C as a frame of reference, we pick there as our starting point, and we'll pick any note at random. Let's say G sharp. The distance between these two notes is an interval. If we pick C, and let's say we pick another note above C, let's say C sharp, it's an interval. The distance between C and C sharp is a certain interval, of which we are going to look at. Now, if we pick F and let's say A, the distance between this F and A is a certain interval. It's called a certain interval. Now, let us begin to understand the names of certain intervals. Now, intervals, I want us to understand that intervals are named based on the size of distance. When I mean size of distance, I'm talking about the number of notes in which they cross, or will I say, let's say the number of tunes or semitones in which they cross, or in which are contained in them. Let's say from the key of C to the key of G, the interval between C and G, the name of this interval will be understood or can be named with respect to the number of semitones which are contained in them, or we can also say the number of notes which are contained in them. Now we are going to see that now as we begin to name these intervals and understand why they bear those names. You understand? Now, before I begin to name the intervals, I would like us to know that while we are naming the intervals, we will be doing two things. Number one is what? Knowing what these intervals are, what their names are. And number two is understanding the why. The why behind them, the why behind the names they bear. So these are the two things we will be. These are our two goals now. From the two goals we want to achieve from naming these intervals. Now, if we begin from C and we pick another note above C, just immediately above C, which is C sharp, the distance between C and C sharp is called an interval of a semitone, or we say a minor second. Okay, let's call it a minor second. The distance between C and C sharp is called an interval of a minor second. The distance between C and C sharp is called an interval of a minor second. That is what the name of that interval is. Now, why do we call it a minor second? Many of us, we know the names of certain things. We know what certain things are. We know how to apply them, but we don't know the why behind their concept. It is being able to understand the why, that we are able to utilize these concepts at any point in time and efficiently. So, um, I would like us to know that understanding the why behind the concept is very important in everything you are doing, whether you are going to school, whether you are doing any other thing. Understand the why. Now, why do we call it a minor second? We call it a minor second because the distance between C and C sharp is just a half tune. It's a distance of a half tune. And so this is the shortest distance in music between two notes. Remember that during our definition of terms, when we were trying to understand the major scale, we came across certain terminologies like full tunes, semitones, half tunes, whole tunes, right? Now, the distance between C, we know that a semitone is what? The distance between a note and the immediate note in front of it, the note that succeeds it immediately. That is what we call a semitone, right? Now, C, the distance between C and C sharp is a semitone. Now, and so therefore, we call this, when we want to call it in a form of an interval, we call it what? An interval of a minor second. Or you could still say an interval of a semitone. Now, why do we also call it an interval of a minor second? Aside from understanding that it is a semitone distance away, it is an interval created by two notes a semitone distance away. Another way we could understand it as an interval of a minor second is by knowing that from C, we know that in the C major scale, if we have understood our numbering system, we know that this is C, this is D, this is E, F, G, A, B, C, right? And we're not following numbering system. We know this is our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? Now, we know that from C to D is our second. So we call it a minor second because the second is being reduced by a semitone. It's not up to a full tune. The distance from C to D is a full tune according to our definition of terms when we were learning the major scale. But the distance now from C to D flat or C sharp is a semitone. Why? Because it's only between two immediate notes. You know, a full tune is made up of two semitones. The first semitone, and the second semitone. The first semitone and the second semitone. That is what makes a full tune, right? Now, we are not looking at the full tune now. The interval is not extending up to the distance of a full tune, but extending at the half of the full tune. That is why we call it a minor second. An interval of a minor second, because the second was being reduced. So, generally speaking, the distance between a certain note and the note succeeding it immediately is called what? An interval of a minor second, or an interval of a semitone. Now, let me also highlight that if we could recall our definition of minor, we understand that minor simply means what? Minor has to do with reduction, right? Reduction by a semitone, right? Whereas major has to be with what? Living at its original state, being at your original state. Good. So the minor is like an alteration from the major. The minor is that thing we get when the major is being altered by reducing a semitone, right? Now, I believe we've understood what the interval of a minor second is, or the interval of a semitone is. That's the first interval. Now, the second interval we'll be coming to understand, or we'll be getting used to now, is the interval between two full notes, two whole notes, a full tune. The interval of a full tune. Remember, interval means distance. So when I'm saying interval, when I'm pronouncing the word interval, I'm also what? Talking about what? Distance. I also mean distance. So the interval between C and D is what? An interval of a full tune. Or we could call it what? An interval of a major second. The interval between C and D is called an interval of a full tune, or we call it an interval of a major second. Now let's move. If we start from C and we move a semitone from above the major second, we get a new interval. And the name of this interval is what? The interval of a minor third. A minor third. Remember that this is our third, actually, following numbering system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I will be using the key of C as a frame of reference for simplicity. Now, we know that in the key of C, this note here represents our 3, right? This note here represents our 3. Now, the interval we are talking about now has to do not with this 3, but with this man here before the 3, right? So, we can now see that what the 3 now has been reduced by a semitone. Now, how do we spot this interval with respect to other keys? All we have to do is what? Move upward 3 semitones in any key we are. Let's say we go to F. We want to get the interval of a minor third in F. If we begin from F, we move up 3 semitones. 1, 2, 3. We have moved up an interval. We have gotten an interval of a minor third. A minor third. Remember, why? Why do we call it a minor third? Because it looks the major third here has been reduced. The major third has been reduced. Remember that when we move below from the major third, we move a semitone downward. This note here is called a minor third, following our numbering system, or we call it the flat 3, with respect to that scale, with respect to that key. So let's go back to the key of C. The distance between C and E flat is known as an interval of a minor third. Now let's proceed. If we move from C and we move a full tune above the minor third and we land on a major third, right? Now the name of this interval, the distance between C and E, is known as the interval of a major third. The interval of a major third. That is the name of this interval over here. Now, why do we call it a major third? Because what? The note that makes it an interval, beginning from the root note, is what? The major third of that scale. What do I mean in essence? Remember, we are dealing with the key of C, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Now, if we look at C, which is our 1, we know, of course, that this man here is the 3 of C. And this is a major, a diatonic note that belongs to C. So the distance between this C being the root, the starting point, and this third here, the original third, is known as an interval of a major third. Now, let's proceed. We know that this is fourth, the fourth of C, right? We know that this is the fourth of C. So the distance between C and this man here, its fourth, is known as what? An interval of a perfect fourth. An interval of a perfect fourth. I love this interval so much. I love using the interval so much when I'm playing melodic lines, when I'm harmonizing my melody, but we'll do that later. So, what am I trying to say? The distance between C and F is an interval of a perfect fourth. Of a perfect fourth. Now, I want us to understand that while we are traveling along the road of studying the names of these intervals, we will encounter certain words that are unique. We have minor and we have perfect. We have minor, we have major, right? Now, when you hear perfect, it simply means what? Something that is what? Belonging to that key. Perfect. Are you getting me now? You can still use it as what? The word for a major. You can still use perfect in place of major. So when we are looking at major, we are looking at what? Those notes that are inside the key, that are diatonic to that particular key. That is why we call it what? Major. They are the ones that what? Make up that particular what? Key. They are the notes diatonic, belonging. Then when we talk about minor, we are talking about what? Those notes that are irrelevant to that key. They are not belonging to the key. In professional terms, we could call them chromatic notes. But let's keep our scope, our knowledge within that word minor for now. Minor. So when we're talking about minor, we're talking about those notes that we don't usually find in that major scale. Because everything we are doing, the knowledge of intervals can only be understood when we have mastered our major scale. Yes, mastering the major scale, I mean understanding the major scale with respect to what? Degrees. The scale numbering system, the one we call the scale numbering system. Some people call it the Nashville numbering system. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So when we hear the word major, we are simply what? Relating to those notes that are belonging to the scale. Those notes that the scale can't do without. Now, when we hear the word minor, we are simply relating to those notes that we don't usually find in the scale. That is the psychology behind this major, minor, and perfect story, usage of words. So, um, where did we stop? We stopped at the perfect fourth, right? It is called the perfect fourth because this fourth is the fourth found in that major scale. Now, let me leave the key of C. I believe by now we ought to have understood keys, right? From my previous video where I taught us about understanding the major scale and with respect to all 12 keys. I believe if you have not watched that video, you can go and um, revisit it and please understand what is happening there, because it is with respect to what is happening there, it is with respect to the understanding we gained from there that we would really know what is really going on here. So I urge you to please go and understand your major scale in all 12 keys, and still understand the degrees, understand the scale as degrees with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So, like I was saying, it is a perfect fourth because what? It is the fourth that is found in the major scale of that key. Let's say since we are dealing with C, it is a fourth found in the major scale of C. Are you getting me? So we call it an interval of a perfect fourth. Are you seeing it now? The interval of a perfect fourth. Now, if we go to another key, let's say the key of G. If we look at, let's go do something a bit different. Let's go to the key of E flat. If we look at E flat, and we want to get an interval of a perfect fourth from E flat, what do? We get our E flat first, and then we get the fourth. We travel up to the extent of the fourths of E flat. We all know that this is our E flat scale, right? Right? So this is the 4 of E flat. So if we start from E flat and we travel up to the 4 of E flat, then we have gotten an E flat what? Perfect fourth. The distance between E flat and its fourth in its major scale is known as an E flat perfect fourth. So that's what I'm trying to say. Now back to our center of concentration, which is C, the C major scale. So the distance between C and F is known as what? A perfect fourth, or we call it the C perfect fourth because we began from C. Now, if we travel a semitone upwards from the perfect fourth, we land on a new key known as the F sharp, right? Or what we call the sharp 5 according to the numbering system. We call it the sharp 5. Sorry, pardon me, the sharp 4. The sharp 4. Now, the name of this interval is called what? An augmented fourth. The interval of an augmented fourth. Now, people will begin to ask, what is the meaning of the word augmented? I believe that okay, maybe not most of us must have come across such word before. When we talk about augmentation in music, we are talking about the ability to raise. So when we hear augmented, it means what? To raise up. To raise up. And opposite of the word augmented is what? Diminish. So if we are not augmenting, we are diminishing. Are you getting me now? So when we are talking about augmented, we are talking about the tendency, the quality of what, or the action of raising up, taking a note above, upward. So we saw that we were at our perfect fourth, and suddenly we took our perfect fourth upward. We went a semitone upward. So due to the fact, by virtue of this movement, going from F, the perfect fourth, to a note, a semitone upward, we named the interval by virtue of that movement an interval of an augmented fourth. Now look at, there is something here now. There is a mystery here now. We don't only call this interval an augmented fourth. Some people call it the diminished fifth. The diminished fifth. Why? By virtue of movement now, if we are on C and let's say we are on G, we are holding an interval between C and G, and suddenly we move a semitone backwards from G. still landing on that F sharp, that same note, we can now call this interval a diminished fifth and no longer a perfect fourth. So you see, they are the same thing. The sounds are the same. Practically, they are the same thing, but due to the little bit of complexity in English language and theory, we begin to find out that certain concepts bear two names. For example, during our study in the major scale, we should have come across what we call the n harmonic equivalence, right? That concept where two notes bear different names, or we'll say two keys. For example, C sharp can also be called D flat. F sharp can also be called G flat, right? Why? By virtue of movement. If we are coming from left to right, or we are ascending, we name them as sharps, right? If we are descending, with those same keys changes their name from sharps to flats. So that is what is really happening here. So by virtue of moving from a perfect fourth upwards, we call this interval an interval of an augmented fourth. Now, by virtue of moving from a fifth, which is our next the next interval we are going to study, by virtue of moving from a fifth downwards, we call it what? The interval of a diminished fifth. So that's what is really that's one thing with this interval. Now, the professionals, the general name, this is the part I just reserved for those who I know who must be watching the videos and of course are used to have already mastered what I'm saying. I've already understood what I'm really saying. The professionals, the general name for this interval is known as the tritone. Yeah, that's what that's as you begin to get into the intermediate part of the piano business, to advanced, you begin to grow. You will one day come to recognize this interval, the name of this interval, as an interval of a tritone. That is the general name, actually. Would I say the popular name given to it? But for the fact that we are circled around the beginner scope, we are most of us here must have been beginners watching this video. We call it what? We are naming it now based on what? Our movement, by virtue of our movement and how many notes that are contained in them, like I said before. So, due to the fact that we are moving from F to F sharp, we are moving from the 4 upwards, we call it an interval of an augmented fourth. Then, if it happens to be in a case where we move from the 5th downwards to that same note, we call it an interval of a diminished fifth. Now, if we move from the augmented fourth further, we land on a note that belongs to the C major scale. And this note, if we could recall, represents the degree 5 of the C major scale, right? And hence, the name of this interval, or the name of the distance between these two notes, the root note and that 5, is known as what? An interval of a perfect fifth. An interval of a perfect fifth. Why? Because it is the fifth that is found in that major scale. That is the fifth that defines that major scale. The 5, the original 5 degree of that major scale, the fifth degree of that major scale. So we call it what? An interval of a perfect fifth. Are you seeing it now? So if we move forward, we raise our fifth upward, we get a new interval. What we call what? The interval of what? An augmented fifth. You understand me now? Now, this is where the trick, the enharmonic equivalence come in again. Some people, by virtue of movement from the fifth upwards, we call it an augmented fifth. But if, assuming we are moving from the sixth, of which we are going to see further in our next interval recognition, if we move from the sixth downward, we call it an interval of a minor sixth. A minor sixth. Remember, I told us that the minor previously means what? The ability of reducing, deviating from the major by a semitone. Deviating from the major by a semitone occurs into a minor, right? So this is a major. Why? Because it is the sixth that is found in the major scale. It is the sixth, the original sixth, the natural sixth of that major scale, being the C major scale. So now we are now deviating, we are now shifting a bit from that six, leaving that place to a closer, a close position though, but not that position. We are shifting from the six, a semitone below. So something has changed. We don't find this note actually in the C major scale, right? And so that is why we call it a minor note. It is a non-diatonic note to the C major scale. And hence, by moving from the sixth below down to that note, we call it a minor sixth. Minor due to the fact that it does not belong to the major scale, and sixth due to the fact that what we are moving from what a sixth, we are moving from the sixth downward. So the note succeeds the sixth by moving below it. So are you seeing it now? That is why we call it a minor sixth. So it has two names. By theory of harmonic equivalence, we call it either the interval of an augmented fifth by virtue of moving from the fifth upwards, or we could call it an interval of a minor sixth by moving from the sixth below downward. So this is an interval of a minor sixth. Now let's proceed. If we move forward from the minor six, we take our fingers forward, we land on the major six, right? Like I defined earlier. The major sixth, the sixth that is found in that major scale, the sixth of that major scale, the original sixth of that major scale, the sixth in which that major scale can't do without. So, in everyday life, when you hear the word major, what comes into our mind is what? Importance. Yeah, another word for major. When we hear the word major, our mindset, our brain begins to capture that picture, importance, something being very important. That is actually what is happening here. Those notes that are called major are those notes that are very important to the scale, of which if they are being removed, if they are not found in the scale could lose its essence. The scale could lose its quality or certain qualities. And so they are major notes because they are the notes that the scale can't do without in their own unique degrees. Are you getting me now? So this is the major sixth. Why? Because this is the real sixth, the defining sixth of the C major scale. So the distance from C to its sixth is known as an interval of a major sixth. Now let us go to another key. Let's say F. We all know that this is the F major scale, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, the octave. Now we know that D is the sixth of F. So if we start from F and we travel to the sixth of F, we have played an F major sixth. This is an interval of an F major sixth. Are you getting me? The distance between F and its sixth notes is an interval of a major sixth, being the F major sixth. So let's go back to our area of concentration, being C. If we move from the major sixth and we step up a semitone upward, we get a new interval there, what we call the augmented sixth. Remember our definition of augmented, the feature of raising up, the ability to raise up, right? Now, if we move from C to A sharp, that is the sharp six. If we sharpen the six, let me put it that way. If we sharpen the six of C, we get a new interval, what we call the augmented sixth. You understand? Now, some people call it the augmented sixth, and some people call it the minor seventh. Enharmonic equivalence also comes into play here again, as we can see. Some people call it the minor sixth, and some people, for example, my screen is giving me minor seventh, right? Okay, now let me explain why. It's still the same concept. We know that this is our seventh in C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So this is our seventh. If we are moving from here downwards, the distance between this C and this point here where we approached, right, coming from this original seventh, is known as the interval of a minor seventh. So by virtue of moving from the seventh downwards, we call it a minor seventh, right? It is a minor seventh. Why? It is the seventh that does not belong to the major scale. This is the major seventh. This is the major seventh, the original seventh of the major scale, the seventh that the major scale can't do without. And this is the minor seventh, means what? Not too relevant to the major scale because it is non-diatonic. So another thing we should understand about minor notes is that there are those notes that are not too relevant to that scale because they are non-diatonic. That is why we understand that um, the minor give us I believe we must have come across those that concept where we say the minor gives a sad feeling and the major whereas gives a brighter feeling. Why? Because the major is really relevant to the major scale, and hence the feeling, it's the mood it creates is going to be bright, while the minor it creates a sad feeling because it does not belong, it does not fit in with the context of the major scale, and so therefore we regard them as what? Minors. And as a result of this, they give sad feeling. So they are not so regarded when it comes to arrangement of notes in the major scale, notes that are really needed to make up the major scale to give that bright feeling. They are irrelevant at that point in time. So that is the psychology behind the minor notes and major notes. So this is a minor seventh by virtue of coming from the seventh. So the interval between the root note or the start C and this point is known as an interval of a minor seventh. Are you getting me now? But if we are coming from the sixth of C and we are going upwards, approaching this same note, we call it an interval of an augmented sixth. Now, let us proceed. Finally, we have the major seventh. As we all know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the distance between C and its seventh is known as an interval of a major seventh. Major seventh. And then finally, the distance between C and C again is known as the octave. This is the eighth, right? Octave. So the octave is that interval that occurs when two notes repeat themselves. That is the best definition for an octave. When two notes repeat themselves, we are said to have what? Played an octave or encountered an octave. For example, D to D is an octave. C sharp to C sharp is an octave. F sharp to F sharp is an octave, right? B to B is an octave. So that is the end of our spotting out of intervals, what they are and why they bear the names they bear. So for let me recap. The distance from C to C sharp is known as an interval of a minor second, which is the shortest distance between two notes in music. The shortest interval ever in music is the interval of the major second. Sorry, the interval of the minor second. Now, the distance between C and D is known as an interval of a major second. Remember my previous explanations on why they bear the major and why it is called the minor. My explanation on major and minor, their differences, their importance to the scale. Why we call them major and minor with respect to contributions to the major scale. So the distance between C and D is an interval of a major second. The distance between C and E flat is an interval of a minor third. A minor third. The distance between C and E itself is an interval of a major third. Remember why we call it a major third, right? With respect to my previous explanations on major and minor contribution. So the interval between C and E is a major third. The distance between C and F is an interval of what? A perfect fourth. An interval of a perfect fourth. The distance between C and F sharp is an interval of an augmented fourth, or an interval of a diminished fifth by virtue of movement. Of course, people call it the tritone, like I said before. The distance between C and the 5 of C is an interval of a perfect fifth. The distance between C and the 5 of C is an interval of a perfect fifth. Now, the distance between C and the sharp 5 of C or the flat 6 of C is an interval of an augmented fifth. Now, the distance between C and A is an interval, which is the 6 of C. A is the 6 of C. The distance between C and the 6 of C is an interval of a major sixth. A major sixth. Now, the distance between C and the sharp 6 of C or the flat 7 of C is an interval of an augmented sixth. It exists though, but very rare. It's mostly used in professional contexts. So, generally speaking, they call this the interval of a minor seventh. Now, the distance between C and the seventh of C, the real seventh of C, is known as the interval of a major seventh. And then the distance that exists between C and its repetition is known as the interval of an octave. So that is all about understanding the what are the names, the what as to the names of these intervals, and the why as to why they bear these names, why the interval bear these names. Now, I want us to understand that there are two types of intervals. There are two types of intervals. We have the melodic intervals, and we have the harmonic intervals. The first interval is the melodic interval, and the second is the harmonic interval. Now, what are melodic intervals? Melodic intervals are those intervals that occurs by virtue of notes succeeding themselves. We know what melody is, right? Melody is defined as a succession of notes. Notes played after the one after the other. That's what we call melody. When notes are being played one after the other, being sounded one after the other, we call it melody. And of course, we know what harmony is, right? A combination of notes sounding together